Hey guys, hopefully you guys did well with your plotting points, connecting lines, and figuring out the slope. So today we're going to review intercepts, right? We got X and Y intercepts. So this is just a review of what we did before Semana Santa, intercepts, all right? And in order to understand intercepts, we have to understand forms of linear equations. So if you remember, right, with linear equations, hold on one second here. So linear equations, they come in the form of ax plus by equals c, a constant. Okay? So anything that you have a variable of x and a variable of y is going to be a linear equation. All right? Now, sometimes we only have x, or ax equals c, and sometimes we only have by equals c, but these are both still linear equations. Okay? Anytime we have variables to the first power, then we have linear equations. All right? So, as far as intercepts go, all right, intercepts, if we remember, intercepts are the points on the Cartesian plane where the line crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. Right? So that line has two intercept points. This is an intercept point, and that is an intercept point. Okay? So the x-intercept is where the line crosses the x-axis. Okay? And at the x-intercept, the y value will equal 0. All right? The y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. All right? And at the y-intercept, the x value is going to equal 0. Because if you look here, this is the origin, 0, 0. So when x equals 0, we haven't gone anywhere on the x-axis. We stay here and we look up, right? That is where the line crosses the y-axis. X is going to equal 0. And the y value is going to be whatever that y value is. Let's say that's 4. Let's say that is 0, 4. All right? That is the y-intercept of this line. And let's say this is 3, 0. Excuse me. We had an eruption there. I just scared Susanna. But at the x-intercept, the y value is 0, and we go over to where x equals 3. So this would be 3, 0, where you see y equals 0. That's the y value. And over here, the x value is 0. All right? Those are the intercept points. So when we get a linear equation, I'm going to erase this. When we get a linear equation in this form, which is called a standard form, all right, let's say we have 2x, right? 2 is the a, that's the coefficient, plus, let's go 3y equals 6. All right? This right here is a linear equation. We have two variables. You can also have one variable, but the variable has to be to the first power. So that is like x to the 1, y to the 1, to the first power, right? And in order to find the intercepts, okay, we want to find the x-intercept and we want to find the y-intercept. So we have 2 points that we can connect with a line to graph this equation, because this equation is going to produce a straight line. So in order to do that, we set up our grid over here where x and y, they have values, and we know intercepts. If you want the y-intercept, you know that the value of x has to be 0. And if you want the x-intercept, you know that the y value has to be 0. Okay? So we just plug these values of 0 into our linear equation to find our intercept points. So to find the y-intercept, okay, x has to equal 0, right here. All right? So in order to find that, we're going to plug 0 in for x. So I have 2 times 0, x is 0, plus 3 times y equals 6. And all we're going to do is solve this equation for y. Well, 2 times 0 is what? 0. So I have 0 plus 3y equals 6, which is also the same thing as just 3y equals 6. And then I can divide 3 from both sides, where y equals positive 2. So when x equals 0, y equals 2. And that is our first point, which is x is 0, y is 2. That's our first point. And that is our y-intercept. All right? Now we need to find our x-intercept. X-intercept. The x-intercept is when y equals 0. Same thing I showed you before. All right? So in order to figure out what does x equal when y equals 0, all we do is we plug the value of 0 in for y. So that gives us 2x plus 3 times, what does y equal? 0 equals 6. Well, we know that 2x plus 3 times 0 is 0 equals 6. I can rewrite it as 2x equals 6. I divide both sides by 2 to get x by itself, and x equals 6 over 2, which is 3. So when y equals 0, x equals 3. And this point, 3, 0, is the x-intercept. All right? So now we have our 2 points that we can graph. So here's our Cartesian plane. So, right, it's going to be positive. This is negative. This is positive. That's negative. Now we can plot these 2 points. All right? So the first point is x equals 0. This is x equals 0. And y equals 2. 1, 2. So boom. That's one of our points. Right? That is 0, 2. And our other point is when x equals 3. Right? Y equals 0. So that's our other point. That is 3, 0. And I can go ahead and connect those lines. And I can go ahead and extend that line through those 2 points. And this line is equal to 2x plus 3y equals 6. This linear equation is represented by this line right here. Okay? Now, we can also, from this, figure out what the slope is. Because we have 2 points, so we can figure out the slope also. So what is the slope? What is the slope of that equation? What is the slope of that equation? Well, the slope is the same thing as the change in y over the change in x, which also equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Well, this is going to be 0.1, and this will be 0.2, right? So if this is 0.1, then this is x1, and that is y1. And if this is 0.2, that'll be x2, and that is y2. So we just plug those values into our equation. So m equals, what's y2? y2 is 0 minus y1 is 2 over, what's x2? That's 3 minus, what's x1? 0. So that equals 0 minus 2 is negative 2 over 3 minus 0 is positive 3. So our slope is negative 2 over 3. Does that make sense? Well, sure, it's a negative slope, right? And that corresponds to the direction of this line. Because we know that line running in this direction is going to be a negative. So this is the slope of that line. Okay? Hopefully you guys understand that. This is a review from last lesson. All right? So, this is just a review of intercepts, the y-intercept and the x-intercept, how to find that from a linear equation. And then once you do that, then you can find the slope as well. All right? So, let's look at something a little different. Let's look at a linear equation where x, there's no y, we just have x equals 4. Well, is that a linear equation? It sure is, because we have a variable to the first power. Well, how do you graph x equals 4? Well, x equals 4 is going to be, we need to find where x equals 4. So this is the x-axis, y-axis, positive, positive, negative, and negative. So x equals 4 is, we go over 1, 2, 3, 4 on the x-axis, and that is a vertical line. It goes straight up and down. This line right here is x equals 4. It goes through the 4 on the x-axis, and the y value just goes on forever. Okay? That is x equals 4. Well, what if I had y equals negative 2? Well, we do the same thing. So y, you find negative 2, that's negative 2 on the y-axis. You put a point right there, and you draw a line parallel to the x-axis or perpendicular to the y-axis. This line right here is y equals negative 2. Okay? So those are a little bit different lines than the standard form of a linear equation. Sometimes you'll just have x equals 4. Well, x equals 4 is a vertical line going through the point where x equals 4. Y equals negative 2? Well, that is a horizontal line that goes straight through where y equals negative 2. Okay? Now, what is the slope of each one of these lines? That's a good question. That's a really good question. So let's look at x equals 4. Okay? Let's look at this. All right? So we know that slope equals change in y over the change in x. All right? So what is the change in y? Well, the change in y, I can go right here, and this point is 4, and y equals 1, and we know this point, that point's on the line, and we know this point's on the line, which is 4, 0, right? So, change in y over change in x is y2 minus y1. Change in x is x2 minus x1. Let's say this is 0.2 and this is 0.1. So 4 is going to be x2. 1 is going to be y2 because this is 0.1. x1 is going to be 4. y1 is going to be 0. So let's figure that out. So y2, which is 1, minus y1, which is 0, over x2, which is 4, minus x1, which is 4. Well, what does that equal? That equals 1 minus 0, which is 1, over 4 minus 4, which is 0. So I have a slope that equals 1 over 0. Now in math, 0 doesn't go into anything. Okay, so anytime we have a denominator of 0, that fraction is undefined. Zero does not go into any number. Okay, so it's undefined. So x equals 4, the slope of x equals 4 is undefined. Okay, well let's look at y equals negative 2. What is the slope there? Well, it's the change in y over the change in x, which equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. All right, we already have one point on this line, and that point is 0, negative 2. So let's look at this point here, where x equals negative 5. So this is negative 5, negative 2. Right? So those are my 2 points on this line. And I can take those points. This is going to be point number 1. That's point number 2. Doesn't matter which one is which. Okay? So I can plug these values in. What is y2? Well, we looked at point 2 and the value of y. So that is going to be negative 2 minus y1. Well, point 1, the y value is negative 2. And that's all over x2. So x2 would be 0.2, the x value is 0, minus, what's x1? Well, it's 0.1, the x value, which is negative 5. So that equals, what's negative 2 minus a negative 2? Well, what is negative times negative? That's a positive, so I've got negative 2 plus 2, right? A negative times a negative is a positive, over 0, 0, and what is a negative times a negative? That's a positive. So that equals negative 2 plus 2, which is 0, over 0 plus 5 is 5. Well, that is the slope of y equals negative 2. Does 5 go into a 0? Yes, it does. Right? 5 goes into 0 how many times? 0 times. So that equals 0. So when y equals negative 2, which creates a horizontal line, your slope, the movement of the line, is 0. When you have x equals 4 and you have a vertical line, okay, because the denominator has a 0 in it, that slope is undefined. It does not have a value. Okay? So I want you guys to understand that and the movement of these two lines, how to graph them, how to graph x equals 4 and y equals -2, and also understanding the concept of the slope, all right? The slope of y equals -2, which is a horizontal line, is 0, because the 0 is in the numerator, and that is an actual value of 0. And when x equals 4, which is a vertical line, the 0 is in the denominator, which makes it undefined. Okay? So, study that, and you have to know that. All right? All right, so let's do an assignment for you guys. All right. What I want you guys to do is I'm going to give you a linear equation. All right? And in this linear equation, what I want you to do is find, number one, I want you to find the intercepts. All right? Number two, I want you to graph the 2 points and connect the 2 points with a line. And then 3, I want you to find the slope of the line. All right, so if I were to give you this one, what would we do? We would say, all right, I've got x plus y equals 4. So I'm doing my little chart over here. I need to find the intercepts. All right, so the y-intercept is when, the x-intercept is when y equals 0. And the x-intercept, the y-intercept is when x equals 0. All right, so then all I do is I plug y in to find x. This is actually 4, my bad. So in order to find the x-intercept, I have x, I substitute y for 0, equals 4, so x equals 4. All right, and then to find the y-intercept, I plug in x equals 0, so 0 plus y equals 4, therefore y equals 4. So next is 0, y equals 4. Those are my 2 intercepts. All right, so I just found my intercepts. All right, and then I'm supposed to graph it. So I graph it. And I want one graph for each problem. One graph for each problem. So that's the x-axis, the y-axis. This is positive, negative, and negative. So I'm going to plot these points. So when x equals 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, y equals 0, so that's one of my points. And then when x equals 0, y equals 4, that's my other point. Okay, so I plotted my 2 points.